Demand Debate proudly presents the first episode of We Debate, You Decide. The question is, does carbon dioxide cause global warming? Former Vice President Al Gore says man-made carbon dioxide does cause global warming, but expert climatologists, including Shunshi Akasofu, Tim Ball, Ian Clark, Piers Corbin, Patrick J. Michaels, Nir Shaviv, and Frederick Singer, say there is no evidence carbon dioxide drives global temperature change. First, we'll hear from Al Gore.
And the ice has stories to tell us. My friend Lonnie Thompson digs core drills in the ice. They dig down and they bring the core drills back up and they look at the ice and they study it. When the snow falls, it traps little bubbles of atmosphere, and they can go in and measure how much CO2 was in the atmosphere the year that that snow fell. What's even more interesting, I think, is they can measure the different isotopes of oxygen and figure out a very precise thermometer and tell you what the temperature was the year that that bubble was trapped in the snow as it fell. They can count back year by year the same way a forester reads tree rings, and you can see each annual layer from the melting and refreezing. So they can go back in a lot of these mountain glaciers 1,000 years. And they constructed a thermometer of the temperature. The blue is cold and the red is warm. So if you look at 1,000 years worth of temperature and compare it to 1,000 years of CO2, you can see how closely they fit together. Now, 1,000 years of CO2 in the mountain glaciers, that's one thing. But in Antarctica, they can go back 650,000 years. This, incidentally, is the first time anybody outside of a small group of scientists has seen this image. This is the present day era, and that's the last ice age. Then it goes up. We're going back in time now, 650,000 years. That's the period of warming between the last two ice ages. That's the second and third ice age back, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh ice age back. Now, an important point. In all of this time, 650,000 years, the CO2 level has never gone above 300 parts per million. Now, as I said, they can also measure temperature. Here's what the temperature has been on our Earth. Now, one thing that kind of jumps out at you is, well, let me put it this way. If my classmate from the 6th grade that talked about Africa and South America were here, he would say, did they ever fit together? Most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But they did, of course. And the relationship is actually very complicated. But there is one relationship that is far more powerful than all the others, and it is this. When there is more carbon dioxide, the temperature gets warmer because it traps more heat from the sun inside. Carbon dioxide, having never gone above 300 parts per million, here is where CO2 is now. Way above where it's ever been as far back as this record will measure.
In summary, Al Gore claims we are seeing unprecedented levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that according to the ice core record, carbon dioxide is driving temperatures higher. Now we'll hear from the expert climatologists.
There were periods, for example, in Earth's history when we had 3 times as much CO2 as we have today, or periods when we had 10 times as much CO2 as we have today. And if CO2 has a large effect on climate, then you should see it in the temperature reconstruction.
If we look at climate through the geological time frame, we would never suspect CO2 as a major climate driver.
None of the major climate changes in the last 1,000 years can be explained by CO2.
We can't say that CO2 will drive climate. It certainly never did in the past.
Anyone who goes around and says that carbon dioxide is responsible for most of the warming of the 20th century hasn't looked at the basic numbers.
This is the record of world temperature during the 20th century used by the IPCC. In the past 150 years, the temperature has risen just over half a degree Celsius. But the strange thing is, most of that rise occurred in the early decades of the 20th century, between 1905 and 1940, when industrial production was still relatively small. After 1940, as industry expanded, for some reason the world cooled. This cooling is even more pronounced in other temperature reconstructions. This graph shows temperature change in the Arctic during the 20th century. Again, most of the rise occurs before 1940. And again, during the post-war economic boom, the temperature falls and continues falling for 35 years.
CO2 began to increase exponentially in about 1940, but the temperature actually began to decrease 1940, continued till about 1975. So this is the opposite relation. When the CO2 is increasing rapidly, but yet the temperature is decreasing, then we cannot say that CO2 and the temperature go together.
Temperature went up significantly up to 1940 when human production of CO2 was relatively low. And then in the post-war years, when industry and the whole economies of the world really got going and human production of CO2 just soared, the global temperature was going down. In other words, the facts didn't fit the theory.
Professor Clark and others have indeed discovered a link between carbon dioxide and temperature. But the link is the wrong way round.
So here we're looking at the ice core record from Vostok, and in the red we see temperature going up from early time to later time at a very key interval when we came out of a glaciation. And we see the temperature going up, and then we see the CO2 coming up. CO2 lags behind that increase. It's got an 800-year lag, so temperature is leading CO2 by 800 years.
There have now been several major ice core surveys. Every one of them shows the same thing. The temperature rises or falls, and then after a few hundred years, carbon dioxide follows.
So obviously, carbon dioxide is not the cause of that warming. In fact, we can say that the warming produced the increase in carbon dioxide.
CO2 clearly cannot be causing temperature changes. It's a product of temperature. It's following temperature changes.
The ice core record goes to the very heart of the problem we have here. They said, if the CO2 increases in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas, then the temperature will go up. But the ice core record shows exactly the opposite. So the fundamental assumption, the most fundamental assumption of the whole theory of climate change due to humans is shown to be wrong.
In summary, the climatologists say that today's atmospheric carbon dioxide levels are not unprecedented, and that neither the historical temperature record nor the ice core data support the notion that higher carbon dioxide levels warm the planet. The ice core data, they say, actually indicate that higher temperatures precede higher levels of carbon dioxide by hundreds of years. We've debated. It's up to you to decide. Stay tuned for more debates from DemandDebate.com, where we're more worried about the intellectual climate.